I'm going to, okay, and thank you all so much for clicking whatever buttons Zoom just asked you to click. And I will send it back over to the wonderful Mariella. And Mariella, thank you for leading us, guiding us in this meditation today. Um, yeah, thank you, my friend.
Thank you, Brian. And again, thank you everyone for being here. So let's practice together. If you like to keep your camera off, or some of you already did it, allow yourself to do that. You can also keep it on. Find a comfortable position, something that is relaxed and alert. If you like to close your eyes or lower the gaze, allow yourself to do that. And as always, I am going to ring the bell 1 time to sign up beginning of practice and 3 times at the end. So if you like, you can allow the sound of the bell to be your object of concentration, where you start bringing your attention to this moment. And as you start bringing all of your attention to this moment, perhaps you may want to start by taking a couple of deeper breaths, taking a deeper inhale through the nose and a deep exhale through the nose. As you find a comfortable position, feel free to adjust the posture, make any movement that the body needs to make, and find a still position. Invite ease into the body with the next inhale, allowing the shoulders to drop down, softening the jaw. Releasing any tension with the next exhale. And just really arriving all of your attention to the here and now. The body being here. You may also want to take a moment to orient yourself in the space you're in. And with your eyes closed, you can do that by bringing awareness to the different sounds around you. Noticing smells, feeling the temperature of the room you're in. And bringing your awareness now to sensations in the body. And notice the different points of contact of the body with the chair, the cushion, the sofa, whatever object you are sitting or laying down on. And notice sensations in the back. Notice sensations in the seat bones area. Sensations in the legs, in the soles of the feet. Feeling the contact of the feet with the ground. As you let the attention settle in the body, taking a moment to just be here, nowhere to go, nothing to do. Bringing awareness to what is it like to be human in this body. What does it feel like to inhabit this human body? And bringing curiosity, kind attention, and to the best of your abilities, no judgmental attitude. So just simply observing what's already here, letting the different parts of you arrive. They're all welcome in this space. And try to keep in your awareness to the felt sense, not thinking about this moment or this experience, but really being with it. I'd like to invite you to see if you can locate the breath in the body. And for the next few moments, just resting the awareness in the experience of the body breathing. And noticing how you don't need to make the breath happen. The body knows how to breathe. You may notice the different characteristics of the breath. Maybe you can rest the attention in whichever part of the body is the easiest to experience the breath in this moment. Whether that's on the tip of the nostrils, and you feel the sensations of the air coming in through the nostrils and coming out. Maybe it's easiest to experience the breath right now in the chest area. Rising and falling of the chest, or perhaps the belly area. Just allow yourself to follow the breath, to feel the breath in the body. And very naturally, the mind will get carried away. So whenever you notice that that happened, it's completely normal. That's what the mind does. So just bringing awareness of the mind getting carried away and bring it back to the breath. To the object of concentration, where you're anchoring the attention. Maybe by now the attention is a little bit more settled. And I'd like to invite you now to expand the attention now to the whole entire body, being aware of the body as a whole. We'll do a very gentle scan of the body and notice how is the physical body feeling right now? What's the overall state of the body? With curiosity and kind attention. And as a way of recognizing what's already here, just noticing how is the physical body feeling right now? Feeling rested, feeling tired. Are unpleasant sensations present? Are pleasant sensations present? See if you can just, for a moment, allow what's here to be here. And remember that this is a moment-to-moment practice. So see if you can allow what's in the physical body to be here just for one moment. And the next moment you can choose that again. or not if it doesn't feel like you have the capacity to do that. You can always bring awareness to that. So take a moment to now bring awareness to the overall state of the mind. The mind feeling busy. It's so quiet. Is it feeling light, heavy, more in between? If it helps you, you can just also label thinking. Thinking is present. Or maybe label the kind of thoughts that are present, preoccupation, worry. And see if you can, again, just bring awareness to that thinking happening. Thoughts are arising and passing by. Not necessarily inviting our attention to engage with the content of the thoughts, just noticing them. Again, they're all welcome in this space. It's an experience. It's arising and passing by. It's impermanent. And directing your attention now to the heart space, to the emotional world. Once again, just noticing what's there, what emotions are present. It's a way of recognizing what's here and to the best of to your abilities, allowing the emotions to be here. Now, one emotion is better than the other. In this practice, we're inclining our attention to notice them and to see them as another experience that is arising and passing by. As you welcome them in this space, perhaps they feel somewhere in the body. So just welcome all that is here. See if you can hold all of what makes us ourselves, that thing that we call ourselves right now. Can we hold all of it? Sensations, thoughts, emotions. And just for a moment, hold it with a loving awareness. And as we approach the end of our practice together, I'd like to end with inviting you to bring attention to gratitude. So see if you can find something that you can be grateful for in this moment, perhaps a part of the body, a person, an object, an event, a pet, whatever that is, and notice how and where gratitude is experiencing the body. Just welcoming the gratitude to be present in this moment. For any reason, gratitude doesn't feel accessible right now, that's okay. You can just bring awareness to that. But if you can, notice how gratitude is felt in the body. And also take a moment and find gratitude for yourself for having made the time to be here and to be with you in this way. You could have been doing something completely different, but you chose to be here to show up for yourself. Perhaps this practice and being with ourselves in this way could be the beginning of a radical acceptance, radical love for oneself. And when I ring the bell, I invite you to see if you can continue with your practice for the time remaining here, for the rest of your day. So you continue to keep your awareness present in the body, a kind attitude and non-judgmental attention. Thank you all again for being here, for practicing together. And I'll now pass it on to Brian, to our wonderful speaker. And I hope that we can be a little bit more present now in our bodies and ready for our amazing talk about boundaries. But I'd let Brian introduce I'm a wonderful speaker. So thank you all again for practicing and for being here.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Mariella. Yeah, and I'm so glad that we all get to sit together and there's so much connection and I'm so glad that we can connect across the world and all of us together. Yeah, so thank you. And again, welcome to those who join mid-sit. And for those that were here at the beginning, we are still the InsightLA Mindfulness and Deep Suffering Practice Group. We're a practice group, we're an affinity group. This is a great group. We like to call this the Hope Group, healing ourselves through the present experience, H.O.P.E, healing ourselves through the present experience. And I am so excited to introduce, it sounds like a concert venue, and now coming to the stage. But I'm so excited, and I'm going to try to keep my comments brief because I could talk about Felina for the whole time, and I'm not going to do that. But I am so excited, and really thank you, Felina, for coming and talking about such an important topic, such an important topic. And I really, really hope that this is not the last time you come. Um, Felina is amazing. I invite you all to check out her information and her work and her offerings. And I'm also excited to learn from you, Felina, as a mindfulness coach, as somebody who is experienced. And thank goodness that we don't live in a world anymore where it's just neck up and talking. And Felina, your experience with somatic experiencing, right? Connecting to our bodies. It's not mind and body, it's mind, body. And for those of us that have suffered so much and felt so disconnected from other people, felt disconnected from this society that makes us feel unwelcome by virtue of our gender, our sexual orientation, our race, our ethnicity, our religion, where we're born, what class we're in, socioeconomic class. Uh, and so I'm so glad you're here and that social justice, social and economic justice is a big part of your work and what you stand for. And the very last thing I'll say is that Felina, I don't know if speaking in third person or second person, Felina, you are Felina. And also, it's so great to be with somebody who has studied with so many other people who stand not only for connection, but also stand for social justice, like the wonderful John Kabat-Zinn, the wonderful Jack Kornfield, the wonderful Peter Levine, Gabor Mate, Hala Khoury, who is amazing. So again, Felina, I'm gonna leave. I'm gonna stop talking. But thank you so much for talking about for me, which is really one of the tenderest and the hardest topics, which is boundaries and connection. And I don't want to lose myself, but I don't want to be hurt. And so thank you for not just naming, but also helping. And anyways, I'm so looking forward to your teaching today. So over to you, Felina. Oh, you know what? Sorry, let me just unmute. Can you unmute yourself?
Yeah, how's
Yay! Perfecto.
wonderful. Thank you so much, Brian, for that wonderful introduction, and Mariela for that beautiful, beautiful practice. It was so great to be led by you in this practice. Thank you so much for that. And just want to thank InsightLA for making spaces like this possible for folks around the world. It's so meaningful and so rich, and is reminding me of some of the blessings of the pandemic, right? This began 3 years ago, and this is one more of those blessings. And so I want to talk a few minutes about this idea of the refuge of boundaries today. And I started thinking about this idea, especially during COVID. So as Brian mentioned, I am a somatic experiencing practitioner based in Palm Springs. I work with clients all over the world. And what I was hearing again and again, and for somatic experiencing, for those of you who don't know, is a body-based psychotherapy that really borrows a lot of the skills that we learn in mindfulness and then takes them to an opportunity for really transforming trauma. And so what I was seeing in so many folks during COVID was how boundary issues were really alive, right? Suddenly people who were at their jobs during the day were all together in one house, and everybody had to figure out how to do Zoom school together, and people had to figure out who was going to be on the network, who was going to be, there was all kinds of stuff in the field about boundaries. Plus we had the boundary of the mask keeping us from the connections in some ways, from like visual cues. And so I was seriously seeing this deep suffering coming into my clients and in the organizations that I work with around how to navigate boundaries, right? Because people had a set of boundaries maybe before the pandemic, and we were all being really invited to re-examine those. And a lot of us maybe haven't really consciously learned the skills of how to do that. I know it was something certainly that I've had to learn with practice in life, but I started thinking a lot about it during then, and seeing how the challenges around boundaries were some of the most stressful in people's lives. We want to be in connection, but we also want to be protected, and that is a theme I'm going to talk about a lot. And I talk about when I mention boundaries is these twin ideas of protection and connection. But why refuge? So, as I've been exploring this idea around boundaries, the word refuge was resonating. So I have a course that I'm teaching on the refuge of boundaries. And when I was putting the course together and I had to come up with a name, for weeks and weeks at a time, the quality that I was seeking from boundaries and that I saw in the folks that I work with is really this idea of refuge. So why refuge? So last summer I was in Turkey, and for those of you who are in Europe, you probably know very, very well about the refugee crisis that has been in the Eastern Mediterranean and throughout the world, and the multiple refugee crises that we have had. And I've been thinking for a very, very long time about what it means to be a refugee, to no longer have a home, right? And just that incredible sense of vulnerability that we experience when we don't have our homes anymore. We don't have access. My parents were born and raised in Europe, and I lived there for quite some time myself. And my father, the island that he was raised on in the Eastern Mediterranean, when he was 3 years old, the entire island was razed, and they became refugees. They became displaced people. And so this idea of refugees has been in my kind of consciousness for a very, very long time. And so when I think of what we want to offer folks who are from Ukraine and from Syria and from Afghanistan and from around the world, it's the sense of, okay, you lost your home, but how can we offer you home again? This feeling of connection. I also think a lot about this idea of how in many places of the world where there's this care for the environment, that what we do is we put places in refuge for animals, for example, right? Or plants or ecosystems that are really, really vulnerable. We say, I'm going to give this place some special protection, whether it's an animal or whether it's a part of the ecosystem. This movement, for example, towards making the entire Amazon a refuge, right? Like, how beautiful would it be for all of us if we could do that? And then I think a lot about what we talk about in Dharma communities, about how when we suffer, we go for refuge to Buddha, Dharma, and Sangha, how we go to refuge to our own awakened and compassionate hearts, and to the teachings of loving kindness and compassion and meditation, and to the community. And so these are all these ways, when I think of these qualities, like these are also the qualities that we can experience with our boundaries when we bring awareness to the issue. And so when I think of like our universal human needs, when we're infants, we desperately need protection, right? We're so vulnerable, right? We're vulnerable to cold and to wet and to snow. And so we're so incredibly vulnerable. And so we have this deep need for protection. And if we're very lucky to have caregivers who can provide us with that protection, we grow. And not all children have those experiences, right? Many places around the world today still, infant mortality is extremely high, including in the United States, by the way, right? Unfortunately. those are children who aren't given the adequate protection that they need. And so for those of us who are here, we may have suffered tremendously, but perhaps we received adequate enough protection to be here. But our boundaries, and we don't just need protection, we also need connection. So I really loved it how it was named at the beginning of the call, which is, yes, healthy boundaries, right? What are healthy boundaries? So that we can experience connection, but not isolation. Because what I see tends to happen for so many of us is in the absence of boundaries. And I think of boundaries as opportunities for connection and protection that are flexible and permeable, that like our skin, they allow in what is good and nourishing, and they keep out what doesn't belong there. And it's really important to name, and I love that we're an international community here today, and that's really an important part of the work that I do. In my previous career, I used to work as a diplomat, and I spend a lot of time in other countries. But this idea that our boundaries are culturally determined is really also important to name. And so a lot of times we can be in discussions about boundaries, like, in like pop culture magazines, for example, or in other contexts that are really speaking to what is adaptive in what we call dominant culture in the United States, right? But that might not be what other people's cultures are from. So in my own lineage, I have examples within this cultural context. So both of my parents are Greek. I was born in this country, but so I'm a first generation American, but I've spent a good part of my life there. And on one side of the family, just to give you some information, and you might be thinking through your own boundaries that might be helpful for you to be reflecting on. One side of the family, my father's side of the family, the way that they use boundaries is with walls, right? They have these very firm walls where, like, sometimes siblings don't talk to each other for decades, right? These are these walls of protection. And on the other side, I have in my maternal lineage, I have very porous boundaries, right? It's like a sea sponge, if you've ever seen a sea sponge, right? Like they take up everything. So one of the things that's great about my maternal lineage is if I ever want to tell somebody one thing, for example, I don't have to tell all 30 members of the family. I can just tell one person, and I know they will tell everybody because their boundaries are really, really, and some of you might understand this, right? And when we are from more tribal cultures, right, this tends to be our adaptation very frequently. So I feel in any conversation about boundaries, it's really important to bring cultural sensitivity to this discussion and to do it in a trauma-informed way. And so when you might be thinking about your own adaptations, right? Because we all have adaptations. When I was teaching, I started studying and practicing Buddhism many years ago, and I started teaching. I often found that there were folks who were very good. They looked like very, very good meditators, right? They looked like they were really sit and they could, transcend these realms. And what I realized as I kept working with them individually, as I was teaching and then my own practice as a coach, was that very often these were folks who had walls for boundaries. And so that no connections were coming in, no human connections, I should say, were coming in. And so they would experience these kinds of, and some people call this a spiritual bypass. That can be a term that is frequently used. But they were using these walls for boundaries because creating flexible and permeable boundaries wasn't something they had been exposed to. So I'm very passionate about introducing the idea of boundaries into spiritual communities in particular, because I find it can often be one of the places where we give up our power and agency around our boundaries, right? So, and when I say boundaries, I mean there's a lot of different types of boundaries. We start from physical boundaries, right? We look at sexual boundaries, like what's okay for my body, what's not okay for my body. We look at financial boundaries, right? Where do I spend my money? Where do I invest my money? How do I make my money? Who do I give my money to? These are all questions around financial boundaries. We look at psychological boundaries, right? Which is, when we are close with others, can we be close with others when they are having strong emotions and stay connected, or do we put up a wall, right? For a lot of us, for those of us who are highly sensitive, and I include myself in this category, right? I've experienced challenge in this area. So how do we maintain those relationships where we can be connected to others in deep suffering, right? Perhaps a loved one is experiencing deep grief or deep mental illness or another struggle. How do we maintain connection without just using walls, right? And then spiritual boundaries, right? Which is also something that I feel is very important. You know, a lot of folks in spiritual communities unfortunately become prey to conspiracy theories, right? Where we're not thinking critically and clearly through ideas that are, do they align with our value? Do they align with our own lived experience, right? Do they align with our own present moment experience? Very frequently when we are in deep suffering, we might reach out to spiritual communities that are not trauma informed. And that's why I was looking at the InsightLA website this week, and I was so happy to see training for teachers really on being more trauma informed. And I'm so grateful. When I was teaching and studying Buddhism many years ago, that wasn't really being offered very often. And so it's really wonderful to see communities such as InsightLA and others bringing in this information around what deep suffering looks like, because we can experience deep suffering because our own boundaries have been violated, right? For those of us who are survivors, we have perhaps decades later, there is still deep suffering, and perhaps we still have difficulties in experiencing protection and connection in relationships because of violations that maybe have happened to our physical boundaries through being maybe bullied in schools, being hit, being sexually assaulted, right? These are ways that we experience deep suffering. And they can have a long-lasting impact on us. And so maybe 10, 20, 30, 40 years down the line, we wonder, wow, it's really hard for me to be in relationships, right? Like I'm lonely, but I don't really know how to navigate those walls. I was teaching a class recently. I periodically offer free workshops to folks who are on my mailing list. And there was a gal who came to one of my calls, and she was saying, you know, I haven't dated. I was divorced, and I haven't dated for many, many, many years. And I'm just trying to get my feet back into the dating pool because I'm lonely, and I'd like a companion. I'd like connection. But whenever I start dating somebody, I just get overwhelmed by that person's energy. I get overwhelmed by their life, and I don't have this ability. So I feel like it's really important for those of us who have a practice of mindfulness in particular to be very attuned to the need to kind of audit our own boundaries on a periodic basis, right? And just check in with them of like, oh, am I overly rigid or am I overly porous? Because we can flip-flop, right? Sometimes we can be super, super rigid and say, like, for example, with dating, like, I'm not dating at all. And then we're like, okay, I'm going to try to date. And then we go into relationships, for example, and then we completely lose our boundaries and we can completely subsumed. So I feel it's very important for those of us who are here to be in an ongoing practice of boundaries. When I work with private somatic experiencing clients and groups, what we really develop a practice, an ongoing experience of, just like we have our meditation practice, of being in this ongoing practice around our boundaries, because they're really essential to getting all the good stuff we want in life, right? That's the bottom line. Boundaries are going to determine the quality of our financial health, our physical health. I work with a lot of people who have chronic illness, and very frequently in chronic illness and autoimmune conditions, the body has a difficulty discerning a boundary. What is inside of the body and what is outside? And so being in an ongoing practice around that can be really meaningful. So I want to check my time here. Great. I want to offer a couple of some of the kind of do's and don'ts that I think about for boundary setting that can be some practical. And if anybody wants this, you can DM me your email, and I'm happy to send you some more information on this that can be kind of a little bit more granular than I can get to today. But I like to think of a couple of do's and don'ts when it comes to boundary setting. And the first one is that think of boundaries as an ongoing practice. Like, we need to get away from what we're told in dominant culture of, like, in 21 days you'll have better boundaries, and you might, right? But if you stop doing the thing, or you leave the treatment center, right, like, things might change, right? So I really want us to be in this place of maturity, emotionally and spiritually and psychologically, of recognizing the need for an ongoing practice around boundaries. I know nobody loves to hear that, but I'm sorry, like, that's just the kind of truth. Another do that I offer folks about boundary setting is do start with yourself. So in the course that I'm teaching that starts next Thursday, one of the things that we are really going to look at it is an audit of all of our boundaries. All the ones I mentioned, the physical, sexual, emotional, financial, time boundaries, that's a big one, particularly for folks who are creatives and self-employed and entrepreneurs. Like, time boundaries are a big one. We need to begin with ourselves. So most of the time when people come to me and are like, hey, Felina, I need some help with some boundary stuff, it's usually, maybe it's a family member, maybe it's a boss, maybe it's a colleague, right? There's somebody out there. But what I always say is that if we want to get really good at setting boundaries, we have to begin with ourselves. So we have to notice how we keep our word to ourselves. And if that's difficult, how can we get support around that, right? How can we reach out to friends? How can we reach out to community? How can we go to maybe 12-step communities, maybe communities like this one? Maybe we can reach out to a therapist or a practitioner, but somebody to help support us in keeping our word to ourselves, right? So for example, one of the things that I will regularly say to myself is, like, I want to sing more. I love to sing, but I don't do it very often, right? I have a full practice. I have a full life. It's something that I want to do, but I wish I did it more, frankly. And so when I'm like in that space to get support around that, I will ask for somebody, hey, can you help me keep my word to myself around practicing singing, even if it's just 5 minutes a day, right? Maybe I'll send a text to a friend and say, hey, Brian, I want to practice doing my singing for today for 10 minutes, right? Can you help me create some accountability so that I get more confident in my ability to keep my word to myself? Because if I'm not confident in my ability to keep my word to myself, and I can't trust myself, why would I be able to trust anybody else? And that's really painful. So I often will say, let's begin with ourselves, right? A big do is let's start at home. And I'll just offer 2 don'ts. And again, if you want this in more granularity, drop your email and you can send it in a private chat. If you don't want to share it with the whole community, feel free to do that. But one of the biggest don'ts I will say is, don't start with the hardest relationship first, right? If you have a difficulty with your mother-in-law or with your boss, right? Or with your spouse, don't start practicing setting boundaries with the most difficult relationship. Start with the easy ones. Maybe start with the folks in your practice community. Start learning to set boundaries with people that you don't have relationships with. I told a quick story. I'll just share with you. I was at I was going to buy new tires, and I was kind of checking out some different places to see what kind of tires I really wanted. I wanted this specific thing. And I stopped at one shop and I asked the guy, how long will it take to do my tires? And he told me. And I said, great. So we started talking about the tires, and I said, but I need to make sure that I'm on the other side of town in half an hour, because I have an appointment. And he said, what kind of appointment do you have? And I thought, wow, that's so interesting that he thinks that's an appropriate question, right? That was very interesting. And so I had a chance to practice and saying, wow, that's really interesting. I'm curious, why are you interested in that question? And we had, because that's what we coaches and people in the helping professions do, right? So I got an opportunity to practice with somebody who I don't have a lot of tension with. I don't already have a long history with. And then the final of the do's and don'ts that I want to share is this is a really hard one, and it's the most important one, which is don't make threats you don't intend to carry out. Right? When we set boundaries, we can get so hot, our amygdala can get on fire, our subcortical brain structures get so activated, and we just say things. And then afterwards, what happens is we regret that we said them. But more importantly, it causes us to lose confidence in ourselves and in our own self-esteem and our own self-confidence, right? So we don't trust ourselves if we go back on our word. And it also has an impact on the credibility that we have with other people. So I just wanted to offer a couple of those do's and don'ts. Like I said, drop your email in the chat and I'd be happy to send you some more resources on this. And I am super happy to take any questions anybody has. Brian asked me to mention also that or said it was welcome to mention that I am offering a course on boundaries, and the registration for that closes on Tuesday. So if you want to hear more about that, I'm happy to tell you more about it. But it's been such a delight being here with you all today. And I just want to thank you so much for your interest in this topic and your inquiry. And I look forward to the discussions, and I'll hang around. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you so much, Felina. Thank you, thank you, thank you, thank you. Just going to turn off the recording.